When I was in the last year of my undergraduate degree, I read a 1972 conversation between Michel Foucault and Gilles Deleuze that profoundly shaped the way that I think not only about theory, but also about the relationship between ethnography and theory, or how ethnography is theory. Foucault begins by relaying an encounter that he had with a Maoist who reflected that he could always understand why Jean-Paul Sartre and Foucault himself were aligned with their struggle due to their theoretical interest in politics and confinement. But for the Maoist, Deleuze was always an enigma. Deleuze responds by saying that he and Guattari are putting forward a new way of seeing the relationship between theory and practice. He says, on one hand, and I'm going to paraphrase here, but here's the full quote. On one hand, praxis used to be conceived as an application of theory as a consequence. On the other hand, and inversely, praxis was supposed to inspire theory. It was supposed to create a new form of theory. In any case, their relationship took the form of a process of totalization in one shape or another. Maybe we're asking the question in a new way, he says. For us, the relationships between theory and praxis are much more fragmentary and partial. In the first place, a theory is always local. The rule of application is never one of resemblance. In the second place, as soon as a theory takes hold in its own domain, it encounters obstacles, walls, collisions, and impediments. Foucault agrees. So it is that theory that does not express, translate, or apply a praxis. It is a praxis, but a local and regional, as you say, non-totalizing praxis. A theory is the regional system of this struggle. So no, it's not, we've kind of moved on from thinking with Deleuze and Foucault, but this conversation really struck a chord with me when I was giving this prompt. Because it wasn't really until I was in the foothills of the Indian Himalayas that I started to understand what these guys were talking about. I'd arrived in the hill state of Himachal Pradesh to work with the Gadi community, a formerly agro-pastoralist scheduled tribe who've settled on either side of the Dholadar range. I was interested in understanding experiences of gendered and generational inequality in this community as shepherding became an unviable livelihood, as they sedentarized, built permanent houses, sought education, faced a rapidly changing climate. I began my inquiries with a household survey that included a PHQ-9, an adapted standard health questionnaire that was translated into Hindi and Gadi. In almost every household I visited, people laughed off my questions. They felt incongruent and abstract, puny in the face of the imminent fluctuations of life that were held in each household. These questions were soon forgotten as conversations over tea turned to more pressing concerns of bodily aches and pains, health bills and hospital visits, encounters with healers and in shrines. In the narration of such concerns, people, and particularly women, turned again and again to the phrase tension. Mujhe bahut tension hai. In Hindi, Punjabi, Urdu, and even Turkic languages, tension is a polysemic term wielded in different ways to describe the strains and scrapes of life. In the Gadi community, tension is used by people without noticing, an ordinary expression. No tension, madam, a taxi driver would reassure me. She gives me so much tension, a mother would laugh, of a daughter who spilt tea, meant for a guest. Yet as I came to be enfolded in the stresses of life during my fieldwork in the Dholadar foothills, I came to realize that tension was more than this. It might be understood here as an emic theory that Gadi people were using to theorize the way in which social, political, economic, and environmental change was settling and sedimenting in their bodies. Tension was used to speak to the inherently ambiguous, capricious experiences of disorientation. As Shanengai suggests, what we might think of as a state of feeling vaguely unsettled or confused. Tension opened a window into the giddy moments where people aren't sure what to feel about the times that they are in, or aren't sure what to feel with respect to intimate others, especially those of different generations. These feelings are different, as Danlan Rutherford points out, to the prescribed sentiments that issue from social roles, but instead inhabit a gap between the social role and the fraught and awkward experiences of social life. It is here that theory emerged. There is no word for tension in Gadi, I was told. Through these encounters, I came to realize that expressions of tension were not only speech acts with communicative functions. Instead, they were fissures in the fabric of everyday life, moments where their tellers sought new forms of voice. Oh, we're not there yet. Crucially, tension was not a stable theory of distress across this community. As my skills for listening to tension developed, and as I followed tension along fractured relationships of kinship and care, a larger picture of such shifting inequalities and their affective and embodied registers began to emerge. I realized that tension is not evenly distributed across the Gadi community. Neither is it articulated in a single rigid discursive genre, nor is it manifest in uniform symptoms. Some experience tension as a slow wastage of muscles, a seepage of bodily vitality. Others experience it as a fraught and frantic surge of heat in the body, a skyrocketing blood pressure. These intimate and unsettling states open their bodies to more malign forces, witches, ghosts, and demons that still inhabit the mountains, inducing states of possession and trance. Some bodies absorb tension more than others. People who had roles in the pastoral livelihood that had been devalued experienced tension acutely. Tension pooled, especially along the grooves of fractured intrafamiliar and intergenerational relations, where expectations of reciprocity, sharing, or respect from intimate others went unmet. People who experienced the direct discrimination or subtle humiliation of caste stigma were more likely to feel tension's effects. It took me a long time to realize that tension could not be parceled out into the sub-theories or diagnostics dependent on age group, symptomology, caste, or tribal background. Across all of these different manifestations, tension was practiced, as Deleuze says, as a series of relays that had no essential relationship to the signifier. This realization was freeing, because it meant that I didn't have to try and wrestle these acts of telling into a taxonomy or try to suggest if and how tension was really depression, actually anxiety, caused by climate change or livelihood change or kinship change. It was all of these things, and it was also, in many instances, none. Here I heeded Arthur Kleinman's warnings about category fallacy, where nosological categories generated by psychiatrists or anthropologists are reified and misleadingly applied to members of other cultures for whom they lack coherence or validity. I hope to take this further by seeing that instead following tension meant leaning into the layered, chameleonic, ambivalent nature of distress, how people attributed at different moments to different experiences, how it might appear acutely and then just as quickly ebb away. I realized that I could do this by using the semiotic tools of canonical medical anthropology, but deploying them outside of biomedical epistemic structures that medical anthropologists often find themselves in. This meant allowing tension to speak back to Western naturalist or modernist imaginaries that remain firmly rooted in and perpetuate the purification of nature from culture or body from mind. It meant allowing these theories, imaginations, and voices, and here I was very inspired by Sophie and Diona Nari's piece on theorizing climate change, their voices to be taken seriously on their own terms, which may be slippery, unstable, and incoherent, and may contain traces of multiple patchy ontological or cosmological orientations. Ethnography I found to be an ideal tool for this kind of examination of distress, for it offers a descriptive encounter with distress in its complex relationality that is not paralleled in the positivism of social or medical sciences. When I returned from the field and began to write up my work, following tension began to mean something different. I had to follow it from its ethnographic relays into other epistemic realms. I was faced with a new set of questions. Can tension travel to explain or resonate with people beyond the Gadi context? Had it traveled already through time? I found that the etymology of tension involves a journey across epochs of medical and social thought. The term can be traced to the Latin tense, to stretch, Its first uses are noted in 16th century France as a medical term denoting a condition of being stretched or strained. It grew in usage over the course of the 17th and 18th century and came to be associated with nerves as a kind of nervous strain. Tension was used by the French medical nosologist Boissier de Sauvage in 1772 to describe a condition of bodily pain and social withdrawal caused by panophobia frontis, also called worry. Herein, the term was nested in the Enlightenment idea of the body as machine, wherein Protestant concerns of productivity converged with a doctrine of materialism that saw the body as a source of energy capable of transforming universal natural energy into mechanical work. The body as machine thesis, one of these popular histories of medicine, was popularized by the French physician and philosopher who saw the body as analogous to a watch spring with unique self-winding qualities. Within this model, tension is a hydraulic quality that both permits and prevents motion. When it does the latter, it becomes associated with fatigue, the antithesis of productivity. But Sauvage and his successors were not the only ones to theorize tension. Tension has been the impetus for such reflections by another psychiatrist of colonial rule, Frantz Fanon. The native's muscles are always tensed, Fanon writes in The Wretched of the Earth. You can't say that he's terrorized or even apprehensive. He's in fact ready at a moment's notice to exchange the role of the quarry for that of the hunter. The native is an oppressed person whose permanent dream is to become the persecutor, end quote. Fanon uses muscular tension as a central metaphor to articulate how this oppression works through the body and causes distress. Specifically, tension indicates an embodiment of repressed temporality, the alienation of people from their own history. These are but two examples of the moments where tension has been theorized and points where it has already traveled, taken on new metaphors, meanings, and contexts that are partially inherited and remade by the Gadi people. Indeed, these reflections led to a more fundamental set of anthropological questions. How do we do justice to emic theory without replicating problematic distinctions between the emic and the etic? How do questions of ownership and authorship of theory become complicated in scholarly publication processes? This genealogy made me realize that tension had traveled and could travel still, so as to speak back to the Western biomedical models that formed it. To do so, it ought to travel on its own terms, with the appropriate credit for the nuanced depictions of scale and relationality, affect and embodiment that it holds. It ought to be pitched against the walls of universalizing models of distress and be used to reveal their contingencies and provincialize their dominant assumptions. And when it does travel, as it already has and surely will resonate with experiences of fraught relationality, distress, and change elsewhere, it will hopefully allow others to name and feel sensations and experiences that are otherwise unnameable or unfeelable, as it did for me when I reflected back on the tension that I encountered in my own family. As such, it will travel not as a neat abstraction, but will become a new kind of regional system of struggle, as Foucault put it, or a situated knowledge in Donna Haraway's terms, taking on their projects, affects, fantasies, and relationalities, and thus forever be changed.